Shabbat Shalom. There's not really a raffle for how we assign Torah portions. We try to link them to birth dates, but ultimately some get some inspirational Torah portions, and some get ones that really challenge them to try to find relevancy and meaning. And the name of this week's Torah portion that Josh received is Aharei Mot, literally after the death. And that's the tone that we set for our Bar Mitzvah Shabbat. But when we look at this week's Torah portion in greater depth, I think it can give us some guidance for how to deal with the time that we're living in. So Aharei Mot, who is it that passed away that we are basing the Torah portion? If you open up your Chumashim to page 679, these are the red books in front of you that list the Torah portion. On page 679, verse 16, we read, Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe, God goes to Moses, Aharei Mot Shnei Bnei Aharon, after the death of the two sons of Aaron, who died when they drew too close to the presence of the Lord. There's a tragic story that takes place a number of weeks ago in our Torah, which is that Nadav and Avihu, Aaron's children, bring a strange fire, and as a result, they die tragically, literally on the day of the inauguration of the sacrificial system. These are Aaron's, the high priest's children. Tradition asks, what is it that they did? One answer is they were intoxicated. They engaged in alcohol or some type of intoxicant that put them in a place where they couldn't offer a normal fire. Another says that their Torah, the way that they saw the world, was too hot and too sharp, and it grew tension with Moses, and the two could not exist, and they had to go. And just those two answers are example of the many different other types of answers that are given. They are very different, and I think ultimately give an insight about the tragedy in Nadav and Avihu that it is not explainable. It did not happen for a reason. It just happened, which puts us in a situation when we look at this week's Torah portion of after the death, of saying, how do we move forward after tragedy happens that cannot be explained? Tragedy that is not fair. And this topic is explored by Rabbi Avi Weiss. And he offers a very interesting take when you look at how the rest of the Torah portion unfolds. This Torah portion has a strange name, but is actually a very popular and central Torah portion, because does anyone know, besides today, on what Jewish holiday we read this Torah portion? Or December, ladies and gentlemen. Yom Kippur. This is the Torah portion of Yom Kippur, because the instruction that Aaron is going to be given by God, that begins in this the chapter that we're reading, is the laws of Yom Kippur. Now, here's another thing to be aware of when we look at the Torah portion. If you're expecting to see, okay, here are the instructions, we're going to fast all day, we're going to wear white, we're going to stand for long periods of time, be ready for that. That's not what Yom Kippur was in the Torah. Rather, Yom Kippur, this Day of Atonement, was centered on this ritual, which is that Aaron had to get 2 goats, put his hands on those 2 goats. We believe that all the sins of the people of Israel will then transfer onto those 2 goats, those poor goats. And then these goats were sent off into the, one was sent off into the wilderness, and one was slaughtered. And what Rabbi Avi Weiss says is that the ritual is bringing is expression to the emotion that is being carried by Aaron. And similarly, those of us who've experienced, whether it be tragedy or challenges in our lives that cannot be explained. And the ritual says someone is going to live, someone is going to have a tragic fate, and ultimately, we don't have control of that. And one way of understanding Yom Kippur is that it is the day where we realize that we don't ultimately have full control. And therefore, we have to do our best to be our best selves. So the first step that Rabbi Avi Weiss points out here is to engage in a ritual that brings meaning to what it is that Aaron is experiencing. The second, which also can't be lost, is that Aaron is now compelled into action. He is recognized as being in a place of mourning and sadness and not left alone. Moshe and God give him these small little steps. Get the goat, bring him forward, one step at a time to reconnect him to the world of his service, to the world of Chaim, his life. And that's another important piece here, which is that we can't abandon ourselves or our loved ones or our community members during moments of grief. We have to strive to keep people connected. We're going to see that a little bit later today when people come up for an aliyah in the anniversary of having lost someone. Or if you've ever been to a home of someone who has recently lost someone, a shiva house. That person is now compelled to stand at the end of the service and say the mourner's kaddish. It's a small act, but it keeps them linked to the community and the cycle of life. There's another piece here that happens as a result of this direction that Aaron is going in. And some of you recall in this room the tragic story of Nachshon Wachsman. This was, in many ways, my introduction to the complexities of living in Israel. My first year of college, I spent living in Jerusalem, and later Shar HaNegev, Kibbutz Sa'ad. And that fall was the tragic story of the kidnapping and the sad fate of Nachshon Wachsman. Esther Wachsman, Nachshon's mother, was asked, "What do you do now? How do you deal with this horrible story of losing your son?" And she says something very wise, which is also, I think, hinted in this week's Torah portion. She says, instead of saying, "Why did this happen to me?" what I direct my thoughts and emotions to is, "What shall I do now?" Instead of allowing those who tried to hurt my son continue to hurt me by leaving me in a state of despair, I will not remain stuck, but I will direct my energy and efforts to the agency that I still have and ask myself, during this difficult time, what can I still do? What is my next step? Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik talks about two ways of dealing with when things happen that seem out of our control. One is fate, the other is destiny. Fate casts each of us into a dimension of life we cannot control. That's fate. It's just how it is. The other is destiny. It's an active existence in which humanity confronts the environment into which she or he was cast. Humanity's mission, according to Rav Yosef Soloveitchik, in this world is to turn fate into destiny, an existence that is passive, an influence to an existence that is active and influential. One of the four-letter words that we've been hearing a lot and using a lot is anti-Semitism. And I see this as a challenging word, not because it does not exist, but because how oftentimes we see anti-Semitism as something that we link to fate. Unfortunately, the tropes of anti-Semitism come back again and again and again, and what we're seeing now is not for the first time, it's not new, but it's a recurring theme of Jewish history. And yet our challenge is not to see anti-Semitism as just the passive fate that we have to accept, but the source of agitation that we must now address with hopes that we can remove it. One of the greatest sources of anti-Semitism is our relationship with the Amalekites, our sworn enemies. And yes, they keep on coming back and back and back in our history. And despite the fact they come back, we continue to be commanded to blot it out, with God instilling in us this idea that it can happen. God reminding us that this is our destiny, to live in a world without anti-Semitism. And if we abandon that, then we submit ourselves to living in fate. We go against God's will, which is to instill us with a sense that we do have power. We do have agency, even when the world seems out of control. So, whether it being putting our hands on 2 goats, or whether it be finding the other things that we need to do today, whether it be supporting letter campaigns, showing up for various rallies, the likings of the good social media post, you fill in the blank for that front. All I will say is our Torah tells us it's not a time to passively accept our fate, but to rise up and stand up for what the world should be, a better tomorrow. Shabbat Shalom.